والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد قصص الأنبياء الجزء الأول قصص الأنبياء الجزء الأول Inshallah, I'm going to take you through the stories of the prophets, and this will be the first part. This is going to be the first part. So, قصص الأنبياء, stories of the prophets. Katika hii darsi yetu nitakuwa nikiwachukua through the stories of the prophets, na inshallah I'm going to use three languages. I will be using Arabic, I will be using Kiswahili, and I will be using English for the purpose of reaching many people inshallah. So nitatumia lugha tatu, nitakuwa nikichanganya ili iweze kufaidisha watu wengi, na itakuwa ni stories tu kuhusu masahaba. And for today's lesson, I'm beginning from the beginning of Qasasul Anbiya, mwanzo kabisa kuanzia pale Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aliumba dunia. So we are going to understand it better as I carry on. فإنشاءالله فلنبدأ. وشتوانزي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه به ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهدي الله فهو المهتدي ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. اللهم اهدنا جميعا. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد، مرحبا بكم مع قصص الأنبياء عليهم السلام. Karibuni nyote katika stories za Anbiya. So hii itakuwa ni darsi ya stories ya manabii. Qasas wa ibar, stories that you're going to learn, stories that have a lot of benefits. تتفيدك سانا هذه أقصاص. يقول الله عز وجل بكتابه الكريم. الله سبحانه وتعالى ametuelezea katika kitabu chake. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We're getting an evidence from the Quran about that we stories, when we recite stories, yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala akiwa mwenye kutuelezea hadithi za mitume, ndani yake kuna faida nyingi. And evidence about that from the Quran, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us from the Quran, نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص بما أوحينا إليك هذا القرآن وإن كنت من قبله لمن الغافلين. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Prophet Muhammad that we are going to recite to you stories. نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص, the best stories. So if we know of any story or any stories that happened in this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Prophet Muhammad, will tell you the best stories that have ever happened before you. And وَإِن كُنْتَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ لَمِنَ الْغَافِلِينَ. And the stories that you're going to tell you, you never knew about them. These are stories that you never knew about them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anamuelezea Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam kwamba tutakuelezea we are going to nitakuelezea stories, yani visa vya mitume ambayo walikutangulia wewe, na mitume hawa and these particular stories, na hizi hadithi ambazo tutakutolea, you never knew about them, haukuwa unazijua, yani sisi ndo tutakuelezea. And the evidence about that, when we go back to the story of Nabi Yusuf alayhi salatu wassalam, when you look at that story, the time of Banu Israel, from the history, they are the ones who knew the stories of their ancestors very well, very clearly. but at times wamekuwa wakizibadilisha, ima wakiweka iweze kuwa something that is going to suit them, or maybe they give it in a different way. And same time unapata kwamba Banu Israel wamekuwa they know the stories, but they don't know in details. So from the story of Nabi Yusuf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it like a whole surah. It's just the story of Nabi Yusuf. And we got to know many things about Nabi Yusuf, where the Banu Israel do not have this the actual story like the way we have it in the Quran. So that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَإِن كُنْتَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ لَمِنَ الْغَافِلِينَ, that you did not know exactly what happened. And then another evidence, وَقَالَ تَعَالَى نَحْنُ نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ نَبَأَهُمْ بِالْحَقِّ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Prophet Muhammad that we'll tell you stories, the real, the actual thing that happened. Yani tutakuelezea ukweli wote wa hizo ahadith. So hapa pia inatuonyesha kwamba Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah ndio ambaye alimuelezea how the stories of the prophets were, exactly how it happened. Yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mwenyewe alimuelezea Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, na yeye Rasul hakututolea sisi out of nowhere. It came from the Quran, and these are the evidence. And at the same time, we from the stories we get ibrah. We learn a lot. We learn a lot from the story. وقال تعالى فقصص القصص لعلهم يتفكرون. This is another ayah. So there are so many ayats in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is encouraging on giving stories whenever we do da'wah. And the same manhaj is the same way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used it has used it in the Quran when doing the da'wah in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, most of the time you find that he's relating the evidence with a story. This is the best method to use, especially to the da'i. Anybody who is doing da'wah, always make your points, your evidence stronger with stories. So and it's the same concept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that whenever he does his da'wah, to relate them with stories. فَقْصُصِ الْقَصَص. Look at this ayah now. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Prophet Muhammad, فَقْصُصِ الْقَصَصَ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Tell them, recite to them these stories, huenda wakawa ni wenye kuzingatia. So this all this Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is encouraging Prophet Muhammad to give the stories of the past, the prophets, that we've seen in the Quran. Why Allah is telling Prophet Muhammad لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, out of stories huenda mtu akawa ni mwenye kuzingatia, akarudi nyuma. And to support this point, when we just look at our current, yani tukiwa tukiangalia maisha yetu vile huwa tunapeleka vitu, ama saa zile mtu anataka kukupatia nasiha, or someone, maybe you want to advise a person, you just give a point, pass a point. Maybe you're having a teenager, you want that teenager, you want to stop him from doing something that is not good, and then you sit with him and you tell him that whatever you're doing is not good. وخلاص انتهيت. You will find that it will reach a point that child or yule mtoto huenda tena karudia lile kosa. But pale ambapo whenever you always pass your message, or maybe unataka kitu kiwe kwenye kifatwe, and then you attach your evidence with a story, it becomes more effective when you attach it with the stories, unlike when you just tell somebody that you don't do this and do that. So this is the method that Allah is teaching Prophet Muhammad, and he wants us also to learn out of it. Whenever we want to pass a message to people, always attach it with a story. Tell that person how something that is going, a real thing that happened. And that way, that is why Allah is saying, لَعَلَّ huenda wakawa ni wenye kuzingatia. هذه الآيات تشير إلى أهمية القصص وكيف أنها منهج قرآني. So all these ayat, this extract that we have mentioned here, zote zinaonesha umuhimu wa kutoa hadithi. وكيف أنها منهج قرآني. And it's also showing us that it's the same method Allah has used in the Quran. When you look at the Quran, Allah has structured it in such, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has laid down the ayats, and most ayats are talking of stories. Like 80% of the Quran is talking about aqsas, visa vya masahaba, visa vya tukiangalia katika Kahf, it's not the Sahaba, it's just people who are locked in there. Kuna mbwa ametajwa hapo, it's most, when you just go through the Quran, the method that Allah has used in the Quran is all about stories, and it's the same application that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching Prophet Muhammad to use in da'wah. And all same to us, when we're doing the da'wah, always make sure that most of your da'wah attach it with either it's a real story or either it's the story of the Sahabas, like that. That way, your da'wah is going to be effective. And the same case happens because it's not a must you be a da'i to tell, to stop people from doing the bad things or the telling people to do the correct things. You can do it even at work. You can do it with your peers. So whenever you do it, try to attach it with a story. It will be more effective. وذكر الله سبحانه وتعالى لنا في كتابه الكريم قصص كثيرة عن الأنبياء بعضها مفصل وبعضها مختصر. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned many stories in the Quran about the Anbiya. And there are some which are short and there are some which are long. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kwenye Quran ametutajia visa vingi sana. That's why I'm saying 80%. The scholars are saying 80% of the Quran is just stories. الذين سمي لنا منهم من الرسل 25 رسولا. So now we want to look into the prophets. So from the Quran, the evidence shows that zile ayat ambazo zimetaja mitume, there are only 25 prophets whom are mentioned in the Quran. That is from the Quran. ذكرهم في بعض الآيات الكريم ومنها قول الله. And the evidence about that there are only 25. There are many, but where now we have the most, pale wametajwa mitume wengi kwenye hizo ayat, it's this particular one that I'm going to read. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. وتلك حجتنا آتيناها إبراهيم على قومه نرفع درجات من نشاء إن ربك حكيم عليم. So we can see here that Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam is being mentioned, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying وَتِلْكَ حُجَّتُنَا آتِينَا إِبْرَاهِيم, and that is our hujjah that we gave Nabi Ibrahim على قومه نرفع درجات من نشاء. And then when you carry on with the وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُ إِسْحَاقَ, and Allah mentioned that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alimbarikia Ibrahim mtoto ambaye anaitwa Ishaq, and Nabi Ishaq alayhi salam was a Nabi, wa Yaqub, so alimbarikia watoto wawili. So Allah blessed Nabi Ibrahim with 2 sons. One was Ishaq, the other one was Yaqub. So this is the evidence showing the Anbiya. كلا هدينا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that both of them will give them hidayah. وَنُوح, and again there's Prophet Nuh, وَهَدَيْنَا من قبل ومن ذريته, and Prophet Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that he also gave him hidayah. من ذريته Dawood, and he blessed him with Dawood. So we can see here from Prophet Nuh comes Dawood, that Allah blessed Nuh with Dawood. Was Sulaiman, and Sulaiman was in the generation of Nuh, and it was from yani alitokana na kizazi cha Nuh. Alikuja Dawood, kisha akakuja Sulaiman, wa Ayub wa Yusuf, and Yusuf came wa Ayub wa Yusuf wa Musa wa Harun, wa kadhalika najzil al-muhsinin. And the same way we give jaza to good people. Yani here most scholars say that whenever you do something good, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you jaza. So because of how they were good, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them to be anbiya. Wa Zakaria wa Yahya, we can see here Zakaria has been mentioned, wa Yahya wa Isa wa Ilyas, kullum min as-salihin. And what sifa is Allah giving them? That they were all pious people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anawasifu, yani anasema na bado kuna Zakaria na kuna Yahya na kuna Isa. Yani kwenye hii aya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning different prophets. Wa Ismaila wa Yasa wa Yusuf wa Yunus wa Lutan wa kullan faddalna ala al-alamin. So na hawa wote tuliwafadhilisha katika dunia. Yani Allah aliwafadhilisha vipi? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them the post of being anbiya, all of them. فضلنا على العالمين, all of them. So this is an evidence of different prophets. And then يقول الله تعالى في تبيان سبب هذا التفصيل الكثير لقصص الأنبياء في القرآن. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us the yani anatuelezea kwa mapana kuhusu ya hawa manabii. wa kullu naqussu alayka min anba'i ar-rusul ma nuthabbit bihi fuadak. Yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that yani wa kullan naqussu alayka, na hawa wote tutakuelezea kuwahusu. min anba'i ar-rusul ma nuthabbit bihi fuadak, something that yani Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam yani itakuwa tathbit kwake. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam kwamba atamuelezea the stories of all these sahabas, so that ikuwe tathbit kwake yeye mwenyewe Rasul bihi fuadak. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anampatia yani kutoka kwenye Quran direct ayat kuonesha kwamba these stories Prophet Muhammad subhanahu wa ta'ala got them from ayat, haikutoka tu kwa mdomo wake, bali imeshuka aya kuonesha kwamba the stories Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mwenyewe amemwelezea Rasul. وجاءك في هذه الحق وموعظة وذكرى للمؤمنين. And out of those stories جاءك يعني جاءك في هذه الحق, hapo ndo itaweza kuonekana ukweli wa those the aqsas itself. wa mau'idha, and it's going to be mau'idha, and it's going to be teaching to people. wa dhikra lilmu'minin, and wale waumini wataweza yani kupata makumbusho mazuri out of telling them the stories of the past, of the previous prophets, na yani stories ya waja wema. So we can see here kwamba why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to put that method of giving a lot of stories from the sahabas sana zaidi ni ili tuweze kupata mauidha na tuweze kupata dhikr kwa waumini kuweza kufaidika. Idhan نثبت لفؤادك النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وفصل في الحق الذي اختلف فيه الناس كتبيان لكثير من الخلل التاريخي. And same time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala amemwelezea Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam ili pia kuweza kutoa yani ile shaka ambayo ilikuwa imeenea. Before Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, people used to rely on the Banu Israel to give them the stories of the past prophets, and then they did what they did because they were not giving the clear evidence of the stories, and they were not giving the true stories. So Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from the Quran, now people knew now the clear picture, because if you look at the story of Nabi Isa alayhi salam, kulikuwa na uongo nyingi ndani yake, but after the Quran now we knew that Nabi Isa alayhi salatu wasalam was not crucified. Na tukajua kwamba yeye alipazwa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alimchukua, but he wasn't crucified. So that is why linuthabbita bihi fuadak, na pia wafaslu fi alhaq alladhi ikhtalafa fihi an-nas katibyan likathir min al-khilal, because most books walikuwa inakhitalifiana. So the Quran came to give evidence to fill the gaps that were created. الذي ورثناه وورثة الناس فجاء القرآن لصحيح هذه الأخطاء. So Quran came to clear all these gaps that were created before on regards of the stories of the Sahabas. ويظهر الحق, and the same time ukweli utaweza kujulikana, وأيضا موعظة وذكرى للمؤمنين. وقال تعالى, and from an evidence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, تلك الرسل فضلنا بعضهم على بعض. Those are prophets that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them different ranks, yani aliwafadhilisha baadhi yao baadhi, hawakuwa wote the same. How? هم مراتب. تلك الرسل فضلنا بعضهم بعض منهم من كلم الله ورفع بعضهم درجات. They are those prophets that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked to them direct. Nabi Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. So we can see he was in a different rank. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that فضلنا بعضهم بعض. Yani we gave them different ranks. So like Nabi Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yeye alipata cheo cha talking to Allah direct, and there's time where he requested Allah that he wants to see him. So فضلنا بعضهم بعض وآتينا عيسى ابن مريم البينات. And look at Nabi Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. Allah did what? Allah alimfanya kazaliwa bila mama bila baba, biruhi al-Qudus, kwa kupitia ruhu al-Qudus. Allah kwenye Qur'an imeitwa ruhu al-Qudus. ولو شاء الله ما اقتتل الذين من بعدهم من بعد ما جاءتهم البينات ولكن اختلفوا فمنهم من آمن ومنهم من كفر ولو شاء الله ما اقتتلوا ولكن الله يفعل ما يريد ولقد أرسلنا رسلا من قبلك منهم من قصصنا عليك. And at the end of this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Prophet Muhammad, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلًا, and we had sent prophets before you, min qablik, before you. Minhum man qasasna alayka. There are some whom we have already told you about them. Yani wale ambaye Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tumeona katika hizo aya tumezisoma before. Allah amemuelezea kulikuwa kuna nabii Ibrahim na Ismail na Ishaq. This is what Allah means here, that وَقَصَصْنَا عَلَيْكَ minhum man lam naqsus alayk, and there are those ones hatuja kuelezea. So it means that kwenye hii aya we are getting an evidence that Allah is telling Prophet Muhammad, the ones we have mentioned in Quran does not mean that they were the only ones, 25 of them. No. Minhum man lam naqsus alayk. They are those ones whom hatuja kuelezea. So wale tumewataja kwenye Quran wako ni 25. Wa minhum, now Allah is saying, and again there are those ones whom we have not put them in there. We have not mentioned them in the Quran. And from that, now we are going to refer it from from the ahadith. How did we, because if they have not been mentioned in the Quran, then we are going to get it from the ahadith that Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is giving us an evidence that to support this ayah, that the 25 are mentioned. And the ones Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that they are not mentioned, then we are going to know from the hadith how many the number of those prophets. So هذه القصص التي جاءت بكتاب الله عز وجل عبرة ووعظ لمن كان له عقل يتفكر. So all this is just giving us all these stories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us in the Quran. Yote bottom line inatufanya tuwe ni wenye kuzingatia, na wale waumini nyoyo zao zizidi kuwa na imani. Every time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us stories, Allah anatuambia kwamba nini? Nikiwapa stories kwenye Quran, wenye akili ndo watakuwa kwenye kuzingatia. When you look at the story of Nabi Musa, if you take a keen look into the story, you can learn things behind the story. You can be able to relate with your life, or you can be able to dig deeper and inner from just a story that is given. And when you reach at that level, sasa hapo ndo Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anawaita ulul albab. Let us look at the next part. يقول الله تعالى لقد كان في قصصهم عبرة لأولي الألباب. This is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is placing those people. Wale huwa wanaenda beyond the story. You're given a story, and you start looking at that story in a different perspective. Allah is calling them ulul albab. لقد كان في قصصهم. Those stories that we are giving you, Prophet Muhammad, huwa inakuwa na ibra kwa ulul albab, kwa wale wenye kuizingatia, those people who go beyond thinking, try to relate it, because sometimes someone can tell you a story na kwambie tu uone tu ni hadithi ya kawaida, but when you look at that story in a different angle, unaweza ukatoa faida nyingi ndani zaidi yake. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning such people, wale ambao they can think beyond the story. ما كان حديثا يفترى. Look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, that when I give the stories, the stories are not just for the sake of giving story. You know, sometimes mtu anaweza kuja kahadithia out of blue, just something kuwafurahisha. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anasema kwamba ma kana hadithan yuftara. These stories we are giving in the Quran, they are not just stories for the sake of stories, ili mjue tu kwamba Nabii Yusuf alikuja akaenda akadini. No, look behind the story. And why is that? ولكن تصديق الذي بين يديه. One, it's تصديق. Kuna ukweli ndani yake mtaipata. وتفصيل كل شيء وهدى ورحمة لقوم يؤمنون. So there's ndani yake mtapata ukweli, because before there was a lot of corruption on regards of the story. So we are going to get the clear picture of how that story was. And second thing, you're going to get hidayah. And how are you going to get hidayah out of a story if you don't go beyond the actual picture of the story? You try to relate it with the life. وَرَحْمَةً لِقَوْمٍ يُؤْمِنُونَ. And it's also going to benefit wale waumini. Watapata wakitolewa such stories, huwa wanasikia moyo wao yani there's something. You know, at times when you give a story from the Quran, kwa waumini unapata they are very keen and they want to know more about it. So kwa waumini watapata kwamba they become attached to it. Al-Anbiya alayhimus salam مصابيح الهدى هم أسرة وقدوة. we know that the prophets wao walikuwa ni kama taa yetu sisi yani the followers, yani they were guiding us. هم قدوة الحسنة, and they were our role model. أولئك الذين هدى الله فبهداه مقتدي. And that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anatueleza kwenye Qur'an kwamba ulaika, yani hao niliwapa hidayah tayari. So you need to seek hidayah from them because I've already given them hidayah. So seek hidayah from them. سر على هذا المنهج واتبع هذا السبيل أرسلهم الله تعالى فترة من بداية الخلق تتابع الرسل. And that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to follow this manhaj and this system and this method of the prophets. Method of the prophets, yani the system of prophet, where he sends the prophets to be our leaders or our role model, and the same thing should be happening to us. Kama kuna mtu mzuri, we follow the footsteps, the footstep of that particular person. So Allah wants us to use that method. That nimeanza hii dunia kwa kumtuma Nabii Adam awe ni kiongozi wenu, then that is how I want you to be. So we are starting from Nabii Adam. We want to see how Nabii Adam was and what we are supposed to follow from Nabii Adam, and the pattern will be that way. في حديث عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, if we read this hadith, Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم is saying, from the hadith of Prophet Muhammad, which says, أن عدد الرسل زاد على 300 رسولا ومن عدد الأنبياء زاد 124,000. From hadith, it shows that Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam is telling us that only the prophets, the Rusul, were more than 300 Rasul, 300 prophets. Only the Rasul, the messengers, were 300. وإن عدد الأنبياء زاد 124,000. And about the Anbiya, because Anbiya ni wale ambao walipatiwa kanuni na sheria, na kama vile Nabii Musa alizungumza na Allah, kama so hawa ni Anbiya. Na messengers ni just the normal messengers, yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yani amewapa hidayah na wanafanya mambo mema. So now al-Anbiya, inasemekana kutoka kwa hadith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ya Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam anatuelezea kwamba Anbiya peke yao walikuwa 420,000, more than 420,000, but the prophets were more than 300. So in that case, it shows that manabii walikuwa wengi sana. There were many. And from that, حتى كان في بني إسرائيل كلما مات نبي قام نبي بعده. Up until it reached a point in the time of Banu Israel, the moment a Nabi dies, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent another Nabi immediately. Hiyo ulikuwa ni wakati wa Banu Israel. Akifa nabii hivi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala akimtuma nabii mwingine. Ma yakhlu min al-anbiya, there was no time where it missed a prophet in their time. That is the time, yani we are being given an example from them. Yani how can we come up to this number? It's because this particular time, the time of Banu Israel, there were many prophets who were sent that particular time. Anakufa huyu ana. And again, there was even time where كان أحيانا في البلد واحد في الزمن واحد 3 أو 4 أنبياء. There was time where in the same town, in the same town, same time, 3 prophets or 4 prophets, أرسلهم الله تعالى. Same time, same town. And evidence of this, we can relate it from the ayah that you have read, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that He sent Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. And from Nabi Ibrahim gave birth to 2 Nabis, Ismail wa Ishaq. Those are 3 prophets, same time. Yes, different balad, but same time. But when you look at Ismail, Nabi Ismail, he was the son of Dawood. Dawood was a prophet. Ismail was a prophet. 2 Nabi, same time. So, and they were all in Banu Israel. So this is where it's showing that the evidence that amount of numbers of Nabi were many. And we are getting it from the time of Banu Israel. And why was this? أرسلهم الله تعالى لإنقاذ البشرية. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was doing this so that it will be a call for human, such that they will never say that we missed someone to guide us. كلما واجهت البشرية الانحراف جاء الأنبياء والرسل عليهم الصلاة والسلام لينقذوا البشرية ويصححوا المسار. Why was this? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to block, yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alitaka ili mwanadamu asiwe na hujja, aje aseme kwamba ya Allah, you know what, in my time I did not get someone to guide me. And when I'm trying to relate this, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes people who think beyond in a good way. So when I try to relate this with our current state, nowadays, alhamdulillah, media is all over. Unapata mpaka kule, those areas that you can't imagine, the media has reached there. So hakuna time mtu atasema kwamba ya Allah mimi sikusikia mawaidha. If you say that you live in those remote areas where you can't know about deen, you have your phone, you can go through mawaidha zimejaa hapo. Anywhere you're traveling, you want what you want, there's something you don't know, you just Google, it's there. So if we talk of our time for this, all this time that, we can complain kwamba tangu wakati wa Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam mpaka sasa hakuna nabi, but the deen is spreading all over and it's spreading like fire all over. But at their time, they must suffer only traveling from one place to another. It was very hard on them. So you can imagine if they had to travel from China to Kenya to seek knowledge or to just look for one hadith, it was very hard for them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them that barakah of sending prophets every other time, not compared to our time, to our time now. So this can tell why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was sending many prophets every other time. Mata nabi qama nabi. A nabi is dying like today. Kumbe nabii mwingine tayari yuko huko anafanya dawa. Wa hadha kana fi sabili da'watihim lillahi azza wa jalla. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was doing this so that the da'wah will reach everyone. بذلوا الجهد وصبروا ليصلوا الرسالة كما أمرهم الله تعالى به فوجودهم حق. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala akawajalia the prophets that were sent, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah blessed them with sabr, patience, and they went through difficult time. Walipitia mitihani, walifanya nini, but they were patient enough, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alifanya hivi ili da'wa yake iweze kufika kwingi, to give them that heart of sabr and going through whatever they went through. All this was because the risala that they were given, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted the risala to reach many. وحاجة البشرية للبشرية, and human, they can't live without someone to guide them. This will take us to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the first man in this world to be a prophet. all this is taking us there. How it came about, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bringing a human in the world and making him to be the first prophet. So all this will chain to Nabi Adam alayhi salam. فالله سبحانه وتعالى ما كان ليترك الناس دون نذير حتى ما يحتج عليه أحد يوم القيامة أن كنا هذا غافلين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never wanted to leave any moment without sending a prophet or without someone who is going to guide them at any given time. Hakutaka Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alitaka throughout, even if it's not a nabi, it's a prophet. Ni mtu tu labda, and same things apply to in our time. Unapata kwamba ima ni shule ama ni college ama ni kazini, unapata tu kuna mtu anatokea, a good person ambaye atakukumbusha, mbona imefika wakati wa swala haujaswali. There's somebody to remind you always, or through the media anyhow, but you just get someone who is going to remind you in a good way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ma kana liyatruka an-nas. Allah did not want to just leave people wawe wanaishi tu hivyo na hawana mtu ambaye atawaongoza. And then they come yawmul qiyamah telling Allah, oh, you know what, we did not get nadhir, hatukupata mtu wa kutu guide. Wama min umma illa khala fiha nadhir. And there's no time in this world imepita illa Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ametumia mtu ambaye atawa guide, somebody who is going to guide them. كل الأمم جاءها النذير حتى لا تقوم حجة على الله سبحانه وتعالى. Every ummah, yani kila umma ambaye wameishi katika dunia, each and every time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been sending someone to guide them. هذه القصص تتميز بأنها قصص الواقعية، ليست خيالية، ليست من نسج الخيال، وإنما هي قصص حدثت في أرض الواقع وعاشتها البشرية في فترات حياتها المختلفة، وتتميز عنها قصص ذات عبرة، ليست قصص لتطرف وتسلي، وإنما مملوءة بالقصص التي تحمل المعاني والعبرة، من أجل أن نسير نحن الذين خلفناهم نسير على هذا النهج ونقتدي بهم ونتمتع عن الأخطاء التي وقعت بها الرسل من قبلنا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us all these stories, not that we take them tumehadithiwa hadithi za kaka sungura na hadithi, no, so that we can benefit out of these stories. And they also carry very strong meanings when you go through them. Hawa ndo wale ulul albab Allah amewataja kule juu, na tuweze kupata guidelines on how to live our life. Because when reading the stories of the past people, that is how we came about knowing how to live the current world. Because we always relate, wao walikuwa hivi, kama walifanya something good, now we do it better. When you read the past, when you follow the stories of the past, you see that there's something that they did and then it made them fail. You're going to make sure that you don't do it the same way. So all this we get out of reading stories and out of following up with the stories. So we are just being encouraged to make sure that you look at stories in a different way. Don't just take stories as stories, but you look them in a different perspective. And here we are told that كان للملوك وللقادة العسكري أثر هائل في حديث المسار. Many people like looking at the history of military so that they can do better. At times watu wanaangalia kwamba okay, a particular war, watu walienda wakapigana, where did they go wrong, where did they go right, and then at times they also praise, they hold esteem to those who did well in that military. Wanasema mtu fulani alikuwa mshindi, huyu alikuwa hivi. So this is known in human, how people envy, or even the kingdom, they go through the stories of the kingdom. This kingdom was like this is how they did, and then they try to get lessons out of it. But here we are told إنما نفهم يعني مسار التاريخ البشرية، لكن أثر الذي تتركه الرسل والأنبياء عليهم السلام أعظم أثر. That للملوك وللقادة العسكرية أثر هائل. Yes, we know that through these stories of military, there's أثر. We benefit a lot. But the أثر that we get from رسل والأنبياء is going to be أعظم أثر. You're going to get that it's way higher than what you benefit from the history of military. وأبلغ في صناعة لن تستطيع أن تفهم التاريخ إذا لم تعرف قصة الأنبياء. And here we are also being told that you will never be able to understand the history of this world if you don't look into the history of the prophets. And that is very true. If you want to understand this world, first start by looking at the stories of the prophets. That's how you're going to get how this world came about, because we're going to see it in the story of Nabi Adam. In Islamic way of putting the story of Nabi Adam alayhi salam, it started from the beginning of this world. So if scientists want to check how this world came about, they have to first get the story of Nabi Adam, because it starts with how the world was created, and then it came to Nabi Adam alayhi salam, and we're going to see it because the story will be done in details. إنما هو صراع بين الحق والباطل، صراع بين أتباعه، وإلى اليوم الصراع الذي يجري في الدنيا. And today, currently, the highest conflict and dispute that is going on in the world is صراع بين أتباع الأنبياء وأعداء الأنبياء عليهم السلام. Is the conflict of the true people who are the right people who are following the prophets, who are the correct, who are saying dini ya haki ni gani. That is the biggest conflict currently in the world, kwamba dini ya haki ni gani, hawa ndo manabii wa ukweli, wengine watasema no, walikuwa ni hawa. So this is the biggest conflict. وأقول كذلك إنك لن تستطيع أن تفهم القرآن إلا إذا عرفت قصص الأنبياء. And again, we are being insisted that you will never understand Quran if you don't know the stories of the Sahabas. If you don't know the stories of the the stories of Anbiya, you will never understand Quran. Because with the research, 80% of Quran is the stories of the Sahaba. So if you want to know the meaning of the Quran, you have to go back to the stories of the Anbiya to understand the meaning. كم آية وآية تتكلم عن الأنبياء. How many ayats in the Quran are talking about the prophets? How many? Many. So, وإذا لم تعرف القصة التي وراءها قد تخفي عليك الكثير من المعاني. And most of the time, you can read an ayah and you see the meaning, but you don't understand that meaning. Why? Because there's a story behind that ayah that you need to know for you to understand that ayah. That again shows how important the stories of the Sahaba, the stories of the prophets, how important they are. Learning the stories of the prophets and the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has structured the Quran with that manhaj of giving the stories of the prophets many times, mentioning the stories of the prophets many times in the Quran, that gives us encourages that we should learn, we should get to know the stories of the Anbiya. كم مرة ذكر نبينا آدم عليه الصلاة والسلام, just Nabi Adam, how many times Nabi Adam has been mentioned in the Quran? وكم مرة ذكر نوح عليه السلام, how many times Nabi Nuh been mentioned? وكم مرة ذكره لنا قصة بني إسرائيل مع موسى, how many times Allah has mentioned the story of Banu Israel with Nabi Musa عليه السلام وفرعون? أكثر من 70 موضع, more than 70 areas in the Quran, more than 70 areas Allah has mentioned the story of Banu Israel وموسى عليه السلام. كذا آية. That is how the stories are of the prophets are in the Quran. وأحيانا عشرات الآيات, and at times you can find many ayats just talking of the prophets. وكم سورة سميت بأسماء الأنبياء, and again, how many surahs have been mentioned with the names of the Anbiya? Surah Nabi. So many surahs also have been mentioned using the names of the prophets. الذي يجهل قصص الأنبياء, the one who will decide to put a blind eye on the stories of the prophets, فاتته جزء كثير من القرآن. Not that you will be missing a very big, huge portion of the Quran. So if you just assume and you just think that, okay, I just want to know what is the hukm of salah, what is the hukm of tahara, and that's it. These stories nishazisikia sana mpaka nimeboeka nazo, I don't need them. No. If you decide to put a blind eye on the stories of the Sahabas, just know that you will be missing a very great portion, a very huge very huge part of understanding the Quran. Because as we mentioned earlier, that you might be reading an ayah, but because you don't know that story, you don't understand it. And we are going to see that later. ونحن كذلك نستعرض قصص الأنبياء حتى نتعلم منهج الدعوة لله عز وجل. And same to us, we use the stories of the Sahaba to give da'wah. And it's the same procedure, approach using the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using in the Quran, giving us the stories of the past people, of also the Anbiya, so that we can use it in our lives. And that is the manhaj that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using to give us da'wah. And for those ones who give da'wah also are supposed to use the same system, the same method, that when you're giving the da'wah to people, use stories to give the da'wah. نحن نريد أن نكون دعاء لله عز وجل ونأمر بالمعروف وننهى عن المنكر وحتى نستطيع أن نسير على منهج الصحيح. We all want to give da'wah to people. tunataka kufaidishana. So whenever you want to make your friend benefit, always relate your point, make your point stronger by attaching it with a story. So why do we do that? So that at the end of it, نسير على منهج الصحيح, so that we can take the correct way that is supposed to be, so that we can all follow the correct way. لا بد لنا من أسوة وقدوة ومثال نقتدي به ونسير على نهجة وأعظم مثال هو النبي. So this, by us using the same method to approach people when doing our da'wah, the method that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used, the method of using stories, we will all be using the same, we will all be under the same approach and the same system, that whenever you want to give a reminder to people, you always use the method that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used it with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the best وأعظم مثال هو النبي, and the biggest example is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us in the Quran, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us from the Quran that follow the footsteps of your Prophet Muhammad, because he was there as our role model, uswatun hasana, our good, yani yeye ni mwelekeo wetu, yani tukimpata yeye ni atatuelekeza katika mwelekeo mzuri. Wa ba'da Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam al-anbiya. And when you give an example of Prophet Muhammad in your da'wah, you can also give examples of the other anbiya. You can use examples of other anbiya. So these are people that you use them to give da'wah. Una attach your evidence with a story. And the best story that you can attach your evidence with is the story of Prophet Muhammad. Kwamba, okay, musile kwa mkono wa kushoto, kuleni kwa mkono wa kulia. Why? This is how Prophet Muhammad used to do. And another way you can use the Anbiya, Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam, alifanya hivi, alichinja hivi, so use examples of this, of the prophets, use examples of Prophet Muhammad to relate it to your evidence. نعم لنا في الصالحين قدوة ومثل لكنهم يأتون بعد الرسول. Yes, we have those good people, pious people that were there. You can also use them use them as a story to attach to your evidence, but they cannot be manzila wahid with the prophets. You either give an example of Prophet Muhammad or you give the example of Nabi Ibrahim, Nabi Musa. You can also use good pious people who were there. يعني ما داس العرض بعد الأنبياء خير من أبي بكر رضي الله، فمنزلة الصحابة مهما وصلت لا تصل إلى منزلة الرسول عليه السلام. Yes, we are told that بعد الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم we have قدوة حسنة من الصالحين. And from the example we were given that there's a hadith that shows yani vile Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam alimpa cheo Abi Bakr kwamba baada yake ni Abu Bakr, na hiyo inaonyesha kwamba baada ya Rasul, baada ya Anbiya, yani ma dasal, from this hadith which says ma dasal ard baada al-Anbiya khair min Abi Bakr, kwamba hakuna yoyote ambaye ni yani salih baada ya manabii illa Abi Bakr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam akampa hicho cheo nani? Abi Bakr ridwanullah. فمنزلة الصحابة من مهما وصلت لا تصل إلى منزلة الرسول عليه السلام. So it does not mean that Sahaba, we can still give examples with the Sahabas, because Pia Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam shows here that we can use the Sahabas to attach to our da'wah, but still they cannot. When you give your evidence or when you support your evidence with the story of the Sahaba, with the story of Anbiya or the story of Rasul, is stronger than using the Sahaba, but it does not mean that Sahabas, you can't attach it to a da'wah. So inshallah, we are going to stop there, and we'll carry on with the second part in our next lesson. So for today, we were just learning the importance of the prophets. You can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, many ayats is encouraging us to learn the stories of the prophets, na pia tumeweza kuona umuhimu wa kuweza kujua hadithi za anbiya, manabii. Na Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, kitu cha pili, ametumia manhaj ya kutoa stories katika Quran kwa kutumia stories za manabii. And 80% of the Quran is the stories of the Anbiya, which means that it holds a very heavy meaning, and the method and the system that is used in the Quran by using relating it with the stories of the prophets. So hicho ni kitu cha pili. Alafu another thing we have learned that anytime you want to give an evidence to someone and it's da'wah, unataka kumtolea mtu, always relate it with the stories of the prophets. And at the end we saw that tunaelezewa, yani first it's who and then second is who. First you start with if you don't get the story that is related to your evidence from Prophet Muhammad, go to Anbiya. If you don't get it from Anbiya, now you can relate it with the Sahaba, Umar, Abu Bakr, Uthman. And if you don't get a story from them, you can now look at those pious people, maybe in our current world or before us, and then you support your evidence with that story. So al-muhim, bottom line, number one, learning the stories of Anbiya is very, very important. Na tumeiona kwamba Allah ameitumia hiyo kama system ya Quran nzima, ni kutoa hadithi ya manabii. Ya pili, ndani yake Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anatafuta wale those critical thinkers who can look at the story and they go yani beyond that story, look at that story in a different way. And I can give an example. So zile mtu anatoa akona teenager, as I mentioned earlier, kuna mmoja anaweza kumwelezea mtoto wake akamwambia, kijana wangu, usifanye hivi, usishikane na marafiki wabaya, itakufanyia hivi. Akamwelezea tu just the basics. And then you get another parent who would just sit down with the son na ajaribu kumwelezea in a story way, kwamba kulikuwa tukiwa wadogo, nilikuwa na rafiki yangu hivi, tukifanya hivi, and now this friend of mine sahizi ameenda kuwa ABCD, na wale tulikuwa nao wameenda. So akamwelezea in a story manner to pass the message. So yule ambaye alikuwa basic na huyo ambaye ametumia story, utapata kwamba yule mtoto akiwa ni mwenye kuzingatia vile Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned that ulul albab, anawataja hao ulul albab, those who go beyond, just try to look at the story in a different picture, na akawasifu. So yule mtoto akiwa ni mtoto mwenye kutafakar, ataelewa the message that the father is trying to pass to him. So this is that method that Allah wants watu ambao wanatoa da'wa waitumie, kwamba mostly use the tariqa of giving stories. And the best stories are which one? The stories of the prophets, Anbiya, the story of Prophet Muhammad, and the stories of the pious people. So that is the summary of our story today, inshallah. Tunaanza hivi na importance of the stories. alafu bado tutafika kwa Nabii Adam. Yani tunaanzia mahali mpaka tufike huko. So inshallah we're going to see the next part next time inshallah. So subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.